Hello everyone, this is Raven and welcome to my channel. Today I wanted to spend some time talking about my main Python project, Legends of Arrowshay Skyrealm. This is a project made entirely in Python 3 using Pygame that I've been working on over the years. And I wanted to spend some time talking about why there was this very long pause in me making videos and why I took down all my old videos about the project. Well, if you've been following my channel for quite some time, you'll notice the name of the project has changed a few times over the years, and you might also know that there are two different projects on my Github. So why is that? Well, the other project on my Github is called Legends of Zhara Skyrealm. Now, I renamed it because I feel like Legends of Arrowshay is a bit easier for most people to pronounce, but it also goes along with the theme of the game a lot better. Arrowshay is the name of the planet that this game takes place on. So, why the big change and why the long space between videos? Well, I talked about this a little bit in my map creation video, but I wanted to spend a bit more time talking about where I'm going with this game and where I was at. So, the old version of the game, Zhara, is still on my GitHub because as I was programming the game, it got to this point where I realized I had pretty much got the whole structure of the code done, and I just needed to add more content. And I felt really good about it until I started adding more content, and the more characters I added on different maps, and the more things you could interact with I noticed it got more and more sluggish. The FPS, the frame rate, dropped significantly. And it got to the point where, as I added content, there were parts of the game that were simply unplayable. And I realized that it was fundamentally flawed. The underlying code to the game was fundamentally flawed, and I needed to change it. The other issue, there were two main issues. It was slow and laggy, and used up a lot of system resources, so it was extremely poorly optimized. And the other issue was the one I discussed in the map creation engine video that I made. So, that other issue is that the maps were just so time-consuming to create because of the way I was doing them. Let's quickly just go back and look at the old maps of the game. The old maps were fairly small, so they were just 64 tiles by 64 tiles, and I was using a very large tile size. I was using 128 pixels by 128 pixels, which is pretty big. And the reason why I did that is because I thought it would allow me to make more detailed objects, and some of the objects look pretty cool because of the level of detail, but using large tiles like this makes it more difficult to interact with the tiles. It makes it more difficult to streamline the program so it doesn't take up a lot of memory when you have maps. And that's why I had to limit the map size to being so small. 64 tiles by 64 tiles, that's tiny. Which meant for a large open-world game, I would have tons of loading screens, and the loading screens were so annoying. That was one of the main issues. It also meant that since I was manually making the maps, I would just have to spend literally years to complete all the maps the game had. It would have required thousands of maps to finish the game, and it was ridiculous. And then another thing you'll notice about these maps is that I had to use objects to define where everything was. Basically, the game ignored the actual tiles because I didn't know about tile properties. In Tiled, yes, you can add properties to Tiled. You can tell it that walls are walls, so in your game, when you just read the properties in, you can know that it's a wall tile. However, I followed this tutorial where they made walls this way when I was first learning to code in Python and Pygame, and I thought, this is the way to do it. It's kind of awkward and weird, but I couldn't find a single tutorial about making tile-based wall detection. And I ended up doing it this really bad way. I mean, look at this. Look at how many objects there are. I had to manually say, okay, this is a wall here, this is a wall, this is a wall here, so you don't bump into this object, so you couldn't walk over it. I had to manually tell it, there's a wall here, there's a wall here. Oh, this is a window here, so you can look through it. I had to manually tell it, this is a cooking fire here, you can cook on this. I had to manually tell it, this is a light here. It was just ridiculous, the amount of things I had to manually stick in here. I had to manually tell it where chairs and tables and things were. And it was just painstakingly horrible. I had to tell it where the water was. Let's go up over here, let's zoom out. And then zoom in here to where this pond is. And you'll see I had to manually tell it where the edge of the water was, so it knows where the water starts, where the shallows were, and then where the deep water was. I even had to manually tell it where all the animals and things were, so animals didn't just automatically spawn in areas. It was just very inefficient, and it took forever to make these maps. Oh, another thing, the NPCs weren't that smart, so they couldn't recognize by the tiles that this was a path, so I had to manually tell it where the paths were, and then the NPCs would seek out the paths. I had to manually tell it where the doors were, so the NPCs would know where a door was. And, it's just so awful. Don't ever make maps like this. Maybe if you're making a very small game, this is okay, but if you're making a large game, or especially a giant open world game like I'm making, do not make maps this way. Use tile-based object detection. It is so much better. And you can see how I did that in my code, in the new version of the code, Legends of Arrowshay, on my GitHub. And let's look at the new maps. I know I talked about this in my other video, but just contrast. Now, most of these objects here that you'll see here, like the rabbits and the guards and things, these are placed here for testing purposes. Those actually won't be there in the future. But you'll notice there are no wall objects anywhere, because if I go into the tile set, I can look at the properties, and in the properties here, I tell it that it's a wall. So it knows that all of these wall objects are walls. It knows that automatically. I don't need wall objects. I can put objects in there if I want to, but it knows this is a wall, it knows this is a chair, it knows this is a bed, and it knows this is a toilet, just because of the tile I used and the tile properties. Like if I click on the door here, it tells me this is a closed wooden door, and that it's also a wall, and then I use those properties in the game. So that's how the game knows that. It's just a dictionary of tile properties, and then how I utilize that, it took me a while to develop my system, because like I said, I couldn't find anyone else that had actually made a tutorial or a guide about how to do that. And I'll probably make a video discussing tile-based detection in more depth in the future. But do not use object-based detection where you have to go through and define what everything is like this, or making maps will just be a nightmare that takes so long. This map took hours and hours to make. Oh, and this map, the new map, in contrast, instead of a 64 by 64 tile map, this is a 1000 by 1000 tile map. This map was completely auto-generated, other than the buildings, in like 20 minutes. Now, the algorithms I'm using could be streamlined. I haven't worked on streamlining them. 20 minutes seems like quite a while, but hours and hours to make a tiny little map like this. This is a map that is like many times the size in 20 minutes automatically generated. All I needed to do is draw the basic shape of the content I wanted and then use that as a mask, and then it automatically generated everything else. I just tweaked the settings in my map generator. If you're interested in the map generator, check out my previous video on that. It's available on my GitHub as well. And I will be modifying that to make it a bit more efficient and better at what it does. There are a few bugs in it, and it is slower than I would like it to be, but for what it does, it is quite good at it. It automatically makes these waves, the animated water. I don't need to mess with any of that manually. It automatically puts trees on the map too. Now here in this you're not seeing the trees because I have the tree layer turned off with the roofs, so we could have seen the walls, but there now we can see the trees. So it automatically has trees on the map, and it knows they're trees because of the tree tiles, and then you can chop them down, then they turn into an animated sprite as they're falling. So that's how I did that. So map creation is so much better now, but the fact that I went from object-based detection to tile-based detection made it so I had to recode huge segments of the code. And I'm not the kind of person that can just code something linearly and present it in a video as I'm coding it. I'm dyslexic, so I tend to code things in this very disordered structure that is just like, I tweak this little bit here, I take this code here, stick it there, and I do a bit of trial and error to see how this code runs, and then I swap the order around of various segments of code to see how it runs better. So you won't find tutorials on my channel where I go line by line and code with you as I talk about it. What you will find instead is after I've already coded a section, I will go through and discuss that. Like I recently coded this this section here that is just so cool. I really like it. It's so hard to see the thing to scroll with on this side for me for some reason on this monitor. There it is. Okay. So I recently coded this play relative volume method, and I'm going to be talking about this probably in my next video, that allows you to play sound, but the volume of that sound depends on the distance that the sound source is away from the player. And it makes it seem a lot more immersive, and you don't get, you know, very loud sounds generated from things that are far away, as you otherwise would. It's a very simple section of code, but it just dramatically improves the game, and I would suggest using this kind of code in your own games. Anyway, I'll go through that in my next video, but my point was that what I'll do in my future videos is I will show you the code I've already made and just go through what each line does, rather than just coding it all there, because I can't code in a linear way. My brain just doesn't work that way. Alright. So, let's take a look at the original game. The original game that I've taken all the videos down about because I don't want the people to be confused and go to the old code on my GitHub. So why do I still have the old code on my GitHub? Because it got to this point where it was just too laggy and too slow, so I needed to completely rebuild the game and restructure the game and redesign some core elements to the game. But I didn't want to do that to the original copy of the game, because what if I screwed up, or how would I know how to track my progress and to see if it was really better in comparison? So what I did instead is I created a separate project, a separate copy of that project on my hard drive and on my GitHub, so I could go back and reference it as I changed things to see how well I improved stuff. So Zhara is still there as a reference for me to create Legends of Arrowshay. Alright, but let's take a look at how far I got in the original code of the game. I have the volume muted just so it won't distract from the conversation I'd like to have. So the title screen is pretty much the same, but I actually went back and changed that later on. The title, again, is different. Other than that, it looks very similar. The character design engine I completely redesigned. I think it's visually more pleasing instead of having tiny text. The screen is more filled out now. And it's just very text-based, very basic, and I was planning on redoing this. This wasn't going to be the final thing. I was just throwing together something simple that would work for me to build the game engine on. Alright, let's go ahead and just select that character and go with it. So we're going to start out on that same map I just showed you, and you will notice that it is full screen. The other version of the game you can play windowed or full screen, the current version. This one only really runs properly in full screen. But you'll notice if you look at the frame rates here, they are jittering so much between like 40 and 60 FPS. It's not consistent at all. It is just so... it's a jittery mess here. Right now we're just getting like 45 FPS, and this is on a pretty decent gaming machine. I mean, it has a GTX 1060 6GB. It's not the best machine, but this is a 2D game. I should be getting at least 60 FPS in this 2D game, but the fact that I'm getting 40-something FPS shows how poorly optimized it was. And look, how many objects do I have on the screen that are actually sprites that move? I only have 2. Just 2. But it's so laggy. Why? Because there aren't just 2 objects on the screen. I have all these wall objects on the screen. I have these bush objects on the screen. I have these objects that tell me I'm inside a building on the screen. A door object. I have a window object. Like, it's just a mess. I have a bed object, a chest object, and they all are sprites. Why are they sprites? I don't know. It's because I followed a tutorial that made the game like this. I didn't know how to code. And what you'll find as you code, if you're a new programmer to a language, is often you'll learn how to do something from a tutorial that might not really teach you the best way of doing it. And then you'll get excited about adding content to the point that you end up with a mess like Zhara was, where you have so much content running on a just very unstable, poorly optimized piece of crap game engine. And that's what I had here. I mean, now I'm getting 60 FPS, but look at how bad the frame rate drops when I go by the bushes. So these are just bushes. And I have a snake here, so I had some animals, the rabbits and things, but just a couple of sprites on the screen should not make the frame rate drop like this on a pretty nice computer. And it's just so laggy and slow, and then you have this jittery mess. I mean, this does have a lot of features that I haven't added back in the game yet. I haven't added back in all the animals yet. I'm doing that slowly because I want to optimize the code, and I'm focusing on code optimization rather than content right now. Once the code is optimized, then I'll add the content in. I'm not going to make the same mistake again. Before, I could do cool things like ride pigs, ride horses, and these are all things that I will add into the game again. So yeah, the game it has less things you can actually do. You can go on quests and things in this version of the game. So there's a ton more content added to this than the current iteration of the game. But it is just such a laggy, slow mess. And just look how long it takes to go from one map to the other. Because the maps are so tiny. Actually, that was pretty fast, but the reason that was pretty fast, it used to be about 100 times slower than that on this computer. And the reason why it was so much slower is because of the way the PyTMX library used to load maps. And I worked together with Bitcraft to help him optimize his code. Well, I didn't really do any of the coding, but I just helped him see that there was something slowing down the code, which is something you would only see in very large maps, like the 1000 by 1000 tiles that I'm using. And most people don't use giant maps in their code, but the fact that I used this giant map helped Bitcraft to see that there was this bug that was slowing things down, where he could optimize it easily. So, whereas before these loading screens would take like minutes to load, now on this computer they load very quickly. That wasn't always the case, but the loading screens were just such a pain. And there's zombies and monsters and things. And you can go in holes. And the skeleton's killing me. So there was a lot more content, but you also had a lot more loading screens. And as far as the content goes, I'm going to add the content back into the game. Also, a thing that this has that the other ones don't have yet is that each type of character starts out in a different location. So there are a lot more places to go in the old version of the game. So let's choose the Shock Teal race instead. And when I play as this race, then it's a very different part of the world, where it's like a post-apocalyptic zombie area, where people from a different time frame and a different world came to this world. And yeah, you can see it had some buggy stuff in the AI. But you can shoot guns and reload. And the guards would seek out the bad guys, the zombies, and they would shoot them. They would also shoot you if you got in their way. And here we're running at like 45 FPS. And, I mean, that's playable, I guess. But it got really bad. When things got really bad was when the night fell, and I had that shadowy lighting mask over things. It got so bad. And it would drop down in the 20s on a nice computer like this. And that's just pathetic for a 2D game. Alright. So there are some features this game has that the new version that Arrowshay doesn't have. There is a lot of content it has that Arrowshay doesn't have, but all of that will be added back in after I'm done streamlining the code, working out the bugs, and making it so the game engine itself is stable and functional and will do what I want it to do once I add all the content back in. Alright, let's look at the current iteration of Arrowshay so we can compare them side by side. Now this one can run in full screen, but it can also run in windowed mode. Alright, so now we have this slightly different menu. We can choose a new game, we can load a game, you see the text is a different size, and the resolution is 1/4 of the resolution of the other game. And the reason why I did that, I made the tiles smaller instead of 128 tiles. They are 32 by 32 pixel tiles. The reason why I did that is so it uses a lot less memory, and my goal is to make things more of a pixel sprite type experience than trying to make this poor, fuzzy-looking, photorealistic-ish experience. So the graphics as they are, I'm still doing a lot of tweaking right now. The graphics as they are very basic, and they will be refined later on. So it does look a bit more pixelated, but I feel like the performance gain I'll get and the limit on system resources, on the usage of system resources, how much that will be reduced, will be a much better benefit than the visual aesthetic of having a higher, having sprites with higher resolution. So here's my new menu. I feel like it's more visually pleasing. Again, there's still some adjusting I need to do to the color palettes to make them look nicer. But you can go through here and select your race. Now I have icons that represent the races instead of just words, which I think makes it a bit more visually pleasing. For now, whichever race you choose, it's just going to, you're all going to appear in the same place, but it will be like it was before once I add the other maps to the game. But right now, they just all appear in the same place. Well, let's choose a cat person with some long purple kitty hair. And then when we're ready, we just click on Start. Now you'll notice the loading screen initially is a lot longer than it was before, but since the map is so much larger, you will rarely see these loading screens compared to how you would see them every 64 tiles you walked before. So I'm doing things to try to speed up the load time, but this loads a very large map. It's 1,000 tiles by 1,000 tiles, so we're talking about a very large map. And again, these NPCs here are just for testing. Right now they just have a basic zombie AI where they chase after me and punch me if I get close to them. Oh, and I temporarily disabled the hitboxes, so I can't bump into them. They can punch me and hit me though. That's because I'm working on fixing that. But look at the frame rates we're getting here. We're getting 60 FPS, and it's not jittering at all. It's very consistent, even with a lot of sprites on the screen. The frame rate is very consistent. It never changes. It's very fluid. And that's what I'm going for, just a very fluid playing experience. It feels a lot more playable, and now I have these different objects I can interact with that are tile-based. I have tile-based walls. I didn't have to tell it what any of these walls are. I didn't have to tell it what any of the lights are either. It just knows these are lights based off of the tiles I used. It knows these are doors based off of the tiles that I used. It knows this is a forge over here based off of the tile that I used. So I can use the anvil if I have materials to do so. It knows this is the smelter based off of the tiles that I used. And I made this new inventory menu and system, which is just so much better than the ugly list-based system I used to have. So I can use the smelter, I can make some ore. It looks like the smelter is broken for some reason. That is something I need to fix. That's something that's interesting though. As you add different segments of code, I often accidentally break old segments of code. So it's just a much more fluid experience. There is still a bit of jitter that I'm trying to work out. But it's hard to argue against this being better performing than the old one. So right now I just have this one map, and I'm not going to make any more maps until everything is running smoothly the way I want it to run. Also, you have this bar down here, which it's a lot like Minecraft. I can stick items there, and then they appear here. I can just click on them to hold them and use them if they're weapons. I don't have any weapons currently. Let's go ahead and exit out of here. We'll quit the game and we'll rerun the game as a different race that starts out with a key to the house. And here we have the long loading screen again. Again, I'm doing things to try to speed up the loading process. It is so much faster than it used to be though, but keep in mind we're just loading a massively larger map that is literally just hundreds of those other, thousands of those other maps really in size. Okay. Now I have access to some weapons, so I just recently added guns back into the game. This area of the game won't actually have guns in it because these people did not come from a world that has guns. They're more medieval. But just to show you the how you can switch between weapons now just by clicking on them. You can also build like in Minecraft, so I can create some blocks. And let's shoot some zombies. Ah, they're clinging to me. Again, I disabled the code that makes it so they actually bump into each other, so they're kind of just clumping together right now. Alright, so I'm gradually adding back in the content, but right now, like I said, I'm just focusing on streamlining it, and you can just see it's running so much smoother. There is a bit of a glitch with the animated tiles, where you'll see the frame rate jitters with tile animation, and that's something that I am also trying to figure out how to limit, but overall, it's not too bad. It's nothing like it used to be. And I feel like the pixel art looks a bit better. There's still some fuzziness in the sprites because I haven't really done very much with a lot of the sprites other than just rescale them. But overall, I'm going to transition from the fuzzy, ugly photo look to a more pixel art look. Oh, and I can like kill rabbits and then cook them on the fire. Kill some rabbits. And there'll be a lot of different things that you can cook, that you can hunt and cook, or that you can gather and cook. So I can put some rabbits on the fire, and I have 2 roasted rabbits, and then I can click on those rabbits and hold them in my hand, and then when my hunger goes down, I can eat the rabbits. See. There we go. Now that I ate the rabbits, my hunger is up and it replenished my HP and stamina. So this is a lot of this is stuff you could do in the other game, but the interface and the way everything is just more fluid is so much better here. And that's what I'm working on now. So even though it has less content, I'm not working on the content, I'm working on streamlining things. Some of the things I'm going to do next is fix the AI. So before, you might have seen in the previous game, the characters were a lot smarter, but I was using the same AI for all of them. And it was just very cumbersome, because I had this AI that would just switch through it would just switch through different switches that were in the class. Now instead I have an AI class that has the basic elements like wall avoiding and things like that, object detection, stuff like that. And then I have different AI classes that inherit that class that have specialized things, specialized behaviors for that kind of thing. So this is the zombie AI, and I can give this AI to any character. I can give it to a zombie, I can give it to a human, I can give it to a rabbit. So the rabbits right now, I think, are just using the basic AI class, and the zombies are using the zombie AI class, and then I made this guard AI class as well. So every different kind of object, every different kind of character can have a different AI object that controls it. So this is way more dynamic. It makes it so I can focus on creating different AIs where the characters will be a lot more intelligent. So right now, the characters are pretty stupid because you see how basic this AI is. It's not very much code. It's just, what, like 30 lines of code or something. But the system is a lot smarter. And in the future, you'll see the AIs I'm going to program in that will be so much better than the other ones. Anyway, so that's my video. I just wanted to take some time explaining what I have done, why there are two different projects, and if you want to check out the code, I would focus in on my newer project, but if you want to look at the content that will be available in the game, the older project has more content in it. Anyway, I just wanted to explain what I've been working on, why there has been this long delay in posting more content, why I took down the older videos that actually showed off more of the game, and why the name change, and all that. Hopefully this video is helpful to anyone that's been following the project. If not, I hope you will follow it and subscribe. Also, on my channel, I'm going to be doing a lot more tech stuff, computer builds, computer modifications, electronics modifications, like my circuit board video, my computer board videos, build videos. And part of the reason for that is because of how I got into programming. The reason why I decided to build computers in the first place, which eventually led to a job, which led to a career, which led to me paying for college to get my degree. The reason why I got into IT and computer building and electronics in the first place is because of programming, because I wanted to make a video game as a child, and I didn't have the money to make a computer that was good enough to program on, really. I didn't have the money to get a computer at all, so what I did is I went out and got some computer parts from a dumpster behind a local business that did a lot of computer stuff, and then I built my first computer out of literal garbage. And then I started collecting computer parts from thrift stores that other people were throwing out, things people said were broken that I learned how to repair. I learned how to solder on new voltage regulators and things like that. And that led to this skill set, and it led to me building better and better computers so I could focus on making better and better programs. And then I took a long break away from doing computer stuff. I had different interests at the time, and I'm just recently getting back into it. So even though I've been programming for many years, I haven't been programming in Python for very long, so I'm still a bit of a noob in some ways. But I hope you're enjoying this project, and if you'd like to follow along, I will post a lot more videos in the future discussing the different segments of code, the different methods I'm using, and how I accomplish what I am accomplishing in this game. So please subscribe, follow along if you're interested in tech stuff, in coding, in gaming, because those are the three things I like to discuss on this channel, because for me, they're not separate things, they're things that are all one aspect of my life. I play video games because I want to learn how to make better video games. I build computers because it helps me be able to make better games if they're running better. It gives me more options, so for me they're just three sides of the same pyramid, I guess. Anyway, that's all I have for today. Have a great one. Please subscribe and comment in the comment section below if you have any comments. Thanks again.